none of us have ever expected that we would see something that we are seeing today. I mean, this is beyond everything that I dare to thought, dare to think, such as we're almost 1 year into a blatant technological industrial genocide that is visible in front of our eyes every day on our phones, and nothing, literally nothing happens.
And again, this goes back to my earlier point, and I'm going to be optimistic on this and believe in in the qualities of human nature. Gen Z, at least in the US, Gen Z is criticized by older generations for being disconnected. They're always on their devices. They don't care about anything. They're just sitting on their phones. Um, they don't know how to socialize. This is how they're described, right? Gen Z in this country has been leading protests now from their spring semesters, now right right back into it in the fall semester. And if you talk to people who are at the encampments, if you look at the encampments, if you see the kind of community that they built in those encampments, I mean, you had people protecting each other, people bringing them food, people bringing them. I mean, what they were able to do in those encampments, that's building community. That's community. That's not a generation that's disconnected. That's a generation that cares deeply about what is happening. They just have not been given voice or platform to do so. They have not been taken seriously in any way. And look at how they're being treated. They're being treated as if they're criminals because they're the ones
Yeah.
standing up against a genocide. So they are disaffected within a society that is so corrupt that it treats their own children, right, their next generation, as criminals for caring about children that are being killed in another place.
US media, establishment media, covers this genocide and mediates reality to its viewers and readers. I think this is maybe the biggest crime, because if they had a more moral and principled stand, I don't think even the political class would have been able to be in such total denial as they are. Like 2 days ago, on the same day, there was this like show. Biden was asked if Netanyahu was doing enough to save the hostages after this terrible thing that happened, and Biden said no. And on the same day, Britain announced that it was suspending some weapon shipments, and we have this cycle. There's like a constant cycle. We stand with Israel, and every once a month or every few weeks, we have to pretend that we still like have a backbone, and we can say Israel, oh no, you misbehaved, and this is part of this routine. I mean, they are trying to, in a very pathetic way, to save face, and I see it as this is part of the genocide. This is part of the genocide. This duplicity. This it drives me nuts. And I think that this may be a place to start. I mean, this is what I think every activist is, getting crazy about. How come no country and no international organization, like seriously, tell what's happening? Tell it like it is. They keep denying like it's the first week of this, and it's 1970, and we don't know what's happening. This is like how the White House briefings happen. This is how they continue to be. We don't really know. We don't really know, but we stand with Israel, and But Netanyahu, what does it mean? Netanyahu didn't do enough. What does it mean?
I guess we're past the days when the State Department spokesperson would just say we're having difficult and frank conversations with our Israeli partners and blah blah blah. I guess that didn't suffice. Now it's Biden saying no, Bibi isn't doing enough, and that's a big story. And then the UK cutting down on what, like 20% of their arms shipments, maybe less than that is a major marker of supposed anti-Semitism in the new right-wing Labor Party. Yeah.
They're still saying that in the press briefings, by the way. I have the unfortunate pleasure of watching them every day.
Oh, they're still saying that.
Yeah, I mean, they still say that, but actually, this is a really interesting point because yesterday they were in this. Matthew Miller, who's the State Department spokesperson, was pushed on this point by Humera Pamuk, who is one of the reporters in the room, and she actually did a great job at pushing him on this issue because the argument was, well, if the UK and the US have very similar legal value-based systems, how are both of these states observing what's happening, and one is drawing one set of conclusions and the other is drawing a different set of conclusions? Like, this was the basic premise of the questioning. And Miller's response, and this, I observed something sort of similar where I thought, I'm like, oh, this is part of how they're playing this. Why they keep saying, well, we're still assessing. And that's basically what Miller said. He said, look, we haven't drawn different, he's like, well, we have different legal systems, but also we haven't drawn our conclusions yet. We're still assessing. The assessments are ongoing. And so this is the sort of legal trick, right? As long as you haven't drawn a conclusion, as long as you say the investigations are ongoing, the assessments are ongoing, then you never have to take any action. You can keep the flow of aid and weapons to Israel under the guise of, well, we are looking into this, but we haven't drawn an assessment. And when you juxtapose that with the way that the US draws conclusions when it comes to Russian war crimes, I mean, it's incredible. The US said definitively that Russia had committed war crimes 1 month into its invasion of Ukraine, and Biden called it a genocide 2 months within its within the invasion of Ukraine. We are now 11 months in, and they cannot. The most the State Department has been able to say is it is reasonable to assess that violations of international law have occurred. That's the most that they'll say. And it's really all a legal process to allow them to continue the flow of weapons. It's a complete farce, basically.
And they called Maduro an illegitimate like the next day after the election. They didn't need time to assess and recount the vote or whatever.
I think it was the
They
day
act
of.
like instantaneously when it's like to their convenience. But here, I mean, but this is beyond a political phenomena at this stage. This is a wider cultural issue. I mean, how do normal people deal with this? I just thought about it today. I mean, what do you tell your kids? I mean, young kids, teenagers in the States and in the UK, they ask their parents, how do you teach a class about democracy or human rights or international law when this is happening? I mean, this is becoming a crisis which goes a lot beyond politics and like international politics or all this. It's a lot bigger.
Yeah, I think we are all of us know, and all of us have known for many, many years, I guess, that we live in a very hypocritical world. I mean, for me, one of the crisis moments was actually 9/11 and the war on terror that came after. And I think we shared at Assal, or that it was one of the crucial moments that we started to see that kind of Western hypocrisy. But I think none of us have ever expected that we would see something that we are seeing today. I mean, this is beyond everything that I dare to think, such as we're almost 1 year into a blatant technological industrial genocide that is visible in front of our eyes every day on our phones, and literally nothing happens. And I've really wondered, and I think late Maruf actually said that in an interview, that there have not been almost, or at least according to him, that Arabs have been really one of the most dehumanized human beings on planet Earth. I mean, millions and millions and millions have died in the past decades. And now you see literally babies and children being killed, and it just nobody does a thing. And it has created such a deep disappointment inside of me, disappointment in humanity. To be very honest, it's not only in the West; it's really the world. Why is nobody doing something? And then people can say, yeah, well, America's very powerful, this and that. But I heard George Galloway say something very, very interesting, and I agree with him. Why is China not sending a hospital ship to the coast of Israel to try and help Palestinian children? They don't need to send weapons. They don't need to send an army. Why are they not sending a hospital ship and pressuring Israel, for example, to say, hey, we want to help these victims? Something. I mean, it's a mega power. I just don't get it.
I used to have these questions like a few months ago, but I think that what we have seen now is that the level of depravity and insanity on the part of Western powers is such that I think China knows that they will go to nuclear war to defend this genocide. They have to assume this, or they will come close to it. They are not letting down. They are not backing down. They are full on, and they left themselves no deniability. I mean, in previous crises, even in the Iraq invasion, when there was the Abu Ghraib, the prison, with all the torture that went on, there was a response to it. They felt like they had to do something and say something. But now they left themselves no room for deniability anymore. And this tells me, I mean, this is what you do when you're desperate, when you don't have a sense of tomorrow, because they act like they don't think next month they're going to be moving on, talking about something else and having like any kind of credibility. They're acting as if this is like this is the last hill to die on, in terms of image, in terms of reputation. This is shocking to me. This is shocking.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think, Assal? What is happening? Is it cultural? Where does this come from?
I think, the idea that in the Western world we had, international law, human rights, democracy, these have always been not quite accurate depictions, right? There's always been holes in that argument. There's always been look, even if you go back to the very inception of the United States as a country, it was founded as a country that was supposed to be a democracy that had slavery enshrined into the Constitution. Women had no rights. I mean, but, the idea that this is the language that's been used. Colonialism used the same language for hundreds of years, right? Colonialism never used the language of we're just going to kill everybody and take your stuff. Colonialism used the language of you're savages and we're here to teach you. We're here to, civilize you. And in the process, kill you and take all of your stuff. So this idea is not new, right? What's different about it, I think, is that facade has completely crumbled, right? If as an observer, if you were privy to this information, if you had studied it, if it was, if you're an activist, if you're someone who really followed it, you always knew that this was a fake facade. But now everyone can see it. There's no one who can't observe this anymore. It's just so incredibly, incredibly obvious. And I think to a certain extent, you can use an example like the Holocaust, right? It's like anti-Semitism was not new to the scene in 1930s Germany. Anti-Semitism had thousands of years, you had 2,000 years of anti-Semitism in Europe. But it went to such an extreme that it was undeniable, and it was sort of this moment of rupture within human history, right? And that's how we understand it, and that's why it's studied in the way that it's studied. And I think this is another rupture, right? It's not just, okay, we're going to say it over and over again. We know that it exists, but maybe we can, PR our way through this. There's no way of doing that anymore, right? The mask is completely off. And I think the implications that Alon was speaking to is so important because, look, what is happening to Palestinians should be enough, right? I shouldn't have to say, but it's bad for us too. Like that, I don't like making that statement because as a human being, that should be enough for us to act and for us to think, this is horrifying. We need to do something. But for some people, for whatever reason, that is not enough, right? Whether it's internalized racism, whether it's not being connected to what's going on, it's on our devices because we're following it. It's very easy not to follow things if you don't want to, right? If you never look at a video, the algorithm will not show you those videos. And so there are other implications, and that is this sort of hill that we're dying on, like you said, right? It's where we've completely shred all of the institutions and the ideas that we had that kept some kind of, at least idea of, order within the world, even if that order was obviously extremely skewed to the Imperial West. But that's completely gone now, right? There's nothing, why would anybody observe any kind of international law? Why would any state do so? It's clearly meaningless. And why, to your point, Kareem, about, why is China not sending a hospital ship or something like that? I agree. I think there is this very serious threat. It's not, it doesn't serve their interest, essentially, right? It doesn't serve any interest for them to do so because they have very little to gain and theoretically, potentially, a lot that can be lost. And that's the very unfortunate situation when you're dealing with power in the way that you are. But it also shows you that power does not care about human beings. At least that's what I mean when I say this whole thing has been shed. Like you don't care about people in your own country, in another country. You don't care about people when you are willing to slaughter children. Like that should be the very easy line of, when the mass slaughter of children is okay, you don't care about people anywhere in the world, in your own country. You just don't care about human life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, if you kind of like game it out and imagine what is most likely to happen if China or Ireland or Spain were to send a hospital ship, most likely the IDF would send a warning, like make up some pretext that would sound good for PR purposes, and then say, okay, we're going to fire on you if you don't leave. And then if they get fired on and the ship is damaged or destroyed or sunk, then what's the next step? You wage war? Well, if war is waged, then you've got the US with its psychopathic leadership and Israel with its psychopathic leadership, ready to up the ante in millions of human lives lost.
Yeah, but at some point, you would think we need to stand up for human life, don't we? I mean, if everybody is always thinking like this, then monsters will forever win. Then monsters like the United States will, the strongest in the room will always win. I mean, there must be some point that other human beings step in. Like, what needs to happen that there is a point in this world that actually somebody really steps in and says, guys, this cannot go on any longer.
Alon? I think that it is useful. I mean, it could help us understand the psychology of this situation if we try to think about it in terms of like a colonizer identity and a sense of ideas and beliefs versus indigenous or native understanding of life and the world. And I used to have this like conflict or dilemma. Why doesn't anyone do or say something? Why doesn't Hezbollah or Iran attack Israel, for instance? What are they waiting for? But like when I thought about it a little more, it made sense to me that in their native or indigenous philosophy, it makes more sense to wage a war of attrition and be patient, and not to push for a war like an end of days war, because this kind of mentality is not, it's not Palestinian, it's not a native, this is not what native people do. We can have a clash with another tribe, and then we'll send like our champions, and they will throw stones at each other. I don't know, and then at the end of the day, we'll depart and try to make peace. We don't wage wars of total annihilation and extermination. This is like a white colonial insanity. This is not tribal war, it was always, almost always limited. You had a sense of, this is where we're fighting, this is when we're fighting, this is how we're fighting. But this is not. So I think that this is a little bit comforting, because I think that time is not on the US and Israel's side. I think that if the global South, if you will, take a position of strategic patience, and let the West like decay and fall into internal conflicts. And I mean, look what's happening to the US in this preposterous election. I mean, what is the meaning of this whole charade? Or what? I mean, what in the UK just had election, and France. I mean, it's become like a theater of the absurd, the West. And I think this is very much the result of not only this genocide, but previous. I mean, the West is in a spiral where it's losing power, losing energy, losing clarity. And I think that if I can be the leader of Iran, even in my mind, but a leader of a global South country or nation or tribe, whatever, I'm saying I'm going to wait another 200 years, 100 years, 50 years, and I will lose some people on the way, but I'm going to have a chance of surviving this insane power, which will stop at anything. Because I think that if you look at the US, it looks like Israel, definitely. Israel is risking annihilation, I mean, like blatantly, without giving like a second thought to any of this. But it seems that now the US has the same insane idea. They are provoking Russia and China and all at the same time. What are you doing? I mean, how is this response? How does it make sense? It makes no sense.
And not only.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So if you're on the other side of this, I think there's a kind of wisdom. We may have like westernized us. We may have forgotten that there is a wisdom to this kind of willingness to bear the brunt of the beast, but not face its like full wrath, and let it tire itself, so to speak. This is, but maybe this is just me trying to make sense of things.
Well, I mean, that what you said reminds me a lot of thinking in Vietnam during the U.S. onslaught on them. I mean, they lost estimates of 3 to 4 million human beings over the course of a couple of decades, and I think that was probably a similar type of thinking that animated them. Like, what are we going to do? Like, is China, the USSR, going to get involved? No, that means probable species death, because it means a nuclear exchange. So we're just going to keep fighting. We're going to lose far too many human lives. But what's our choice? It's a grim logic, but I think, I mean, it reminds me at least of that.
Right, and I also think like what you're saying, Alon, is indeed true. I really think that we can literally see the West unraveling in front of our eyes right now. It's happening everywhere. Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Britain, Canada. So it's not only even Europe. It's all over the West. Australia, and it reminds me of what it reminds me of a discussion we had with Leith, and he said that, the West has always looted everything from other people, and then after they destroyed these countries, said that, look, we are the civilized ones and you guys are the backward ones. So and he said the West not only looted all the resources, but also looted the cultures from other people. And he said, I found this a very good one. He said that even Judeo-Christianity is looted from the Middle East. He said that the cultural heritage of the Western European, the colonizers, he said you should find those in the Vikings. Okay, the Vikings who went from coast to coast and kill and rape and plunder and destroy. And he said the whole civilized culture that came from the Muslim Judeo-Christian world, he said it's my people, not the Europeans. Okay, and I think in a way we see that right now. I think we see that Viking marauder culture actually in full display. It's kill, murder, rape everyone and everything that is against us. And it's talking about nuclear war. I agree with what you guys say. I think that the West is more than willing to use nuclear bombs when the West sees their power fading away. I think the United States, but also Israel, has a kind of a mindset that says, if I cannot run things, if I cannot be the boss, then no one can be the boss. I take everyone with me. I think really that the United States and Israel think like this. And to really focus a bit on that question, do you think that we are actually at the brink of a nuclear war? And I want to start with Assal. What do you think? Do you think we are actually at the brink of a nuclear war right now? How do you see developing where we are when we are at this point?
I mean, it's hard to say because I think since even before there were nuclear weapons, right? The idea of we're sort of in this existential crisis and we're at the end of days is a ubiquitous theme within human history, right? Like that's why you see those themes in most religions, right? There's this idea that we're always in the era that is the end. Like we always think it's the end of days, and that's like a human maybe trait because I don't want to get too deep into where that has evolved from and why that exists, but it's certainly something that is a common trait within human societies. And so I think there's obviously a difference between a biblical threat and nuclear weapons, right? That's an actual concrete, we can see it, we know its power threat. And so it's very interesting because we've reached an era in the last century where we have two existential threats that were created by ourselves, right? It's not an all-powerful being. It's not, some kind of natural disaster. There's no asteroid headed toward the Earth. It's climate that is a man-made issue, and climate change, and it's nuclear weapons, right? These are two very serious threats that have developed over the last century, and they're both made by human beings. And we're not even touching on AI because I don't know enough about it to go into that conversation. But if 1980 science fiction movies have anything to say, that's another threat to our own survival, right? So yes, I think on one hand, that fear of something is very common. I do think it's a real threat. I want to believe, and this might just mean being optimistic, I want to believe that we understand the threat to our own annihilation, right? And that's the logic that has dictated arms treaties between the Soviet Union and the US during the Cold War at the peak of the fear of like a sort of nuclear annihilation of everything in the world. You would think that individual need to survive or desire to survive would override the idea of trying to attack someone else when you know that it can create this chain of events. in that sense, I'm hoping that a little bit of rationality still prevails. That doesn't mean we're not in a dangerous situation, right? I don't know if you guys have seen Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove or How I Learned to Love the Bomb. It's this like 1960s dark comedy that Kubrick makes about basically like a US, I think like a general that just goes crazy and decides he's going to nuke the Soviet Union, and how this sets off a chain of events. And it's a really, it's a dark comedy for a reason. It's dark, but it's funny, because there is that kind of fear. I think that the only real pathway we have is informing a larger portion of the public. I do still think that human beings have power. I do think the public can wield power if organized to do so. And that's why these sort of PR campaigns are starting to fail. They are starting to fail because people are you can't get this regular stream of images. And that's why I bring up children. I'm not saying men and women should be killed and that's okay. I'm just saying that it hits people psychologically a different way when it is children. Because when you're an adult, right? And this is on a biological level, forget the social and emotional, forget all of that. Just on a biological level, when you're an adult, you are meant to protect your progeny and that of others, right? We're meant to protect babies and children. And when you see what's happening, it's just impossible to undo that or to think about it anyway. No level of sort of like, not no level, but for most people, even how pernicious these sort of racist systems are, it cuts through that. And so these types of conversations, having these conversations more and making sure that there are ways to actually organize human societies, that's the only way of stopping it, right? Because the leaders can't be trusted. I don't think, at least not at this point. I mean, they've shown that the amount that is willing to be sacrificed, and they're not calculating based on protecting human life. And put the nuclear issue aside for 1 second, look at how we deal with climate change. Are we willing to do the things that must be done, which would undermine certain capitalist systems, in order to actually address the threat that is climate change? No, there's basically no willingness to address it in any meaningful or serious way. And that's a leadership issue, because the people at the top represent a small minority of the human population that actually wields wealth, and that's why it's so important that ordinary people be informed and be organized to challenge power.
Yeah, and I would quickly jump onto that, Peter, if you allow me. And that is that you say something very crucial, Assal, and you said that we need to inform people more because at the fundamental level, we all care for other human beings, especially when we see children suffer, like in Gaza, for example. And I'm gonna be the bit of a pessimist right now, and I'm gonna say that I think that cultures can be internalizing, certain cultures can make you such a human being that you lose empathy, that you dehumanize yourself by dehumanizing others. And I think in the West we have that problem very, very strongly. I think the pain and suffering of people not classified as white just doesn't register as when it's, for example, Ukrainians. And we have been seeing Palestinians dying, children dying for almost a year now. And there are still many, many people around especially in the West, also in my country, who just refuse to even show one speck of empathy. They immediately jump to October 7. I mean, the people still have the guts to mention October 7 right now, when we can be sure that probably hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have died, and at least probably around 100,000 children. And that also brings me to Israel, and Alon can probably tell us more about that. What do you think? I mean, we have that primal you can almost say primal empathy for children all over the world. That's what Assal said, and I think a lot of people do have that. But I also think that you can have such cultural conditioning, like we have in the former colonial or still colonial cultures. I think you can have such cultural conditioning that even the dying of children just doesn't register because they are of the wrong skin color or the wrong race. And I think Israel is a very good example of that. There are people still today just defending killing children, and you see even in talk programs and media programs in Israel. I saw this program just now of some guy who just openly said, if I could push one button to wipe them all out, I would do it right now, something like that. So how do you see that, Alon? Do you say, okay, we also have that primal, like that internal empathy for children, we just need to spread the word more? Or do you also have a bit of a pessimistic look and say, like, for some people and some cultures, it's almost too late?
Can I really quickly
I think
something you said and then give it to Alon to really just very quickly, because
yeah,
I
sure.
want to say one thing in the US context. There was just a poll from CBS that shows that a bipartisan majority of Americans think that the US should stop arming Israel to carry out its atrocities in Gaza. So one of the problems, and that's in the US, this is the most like brainwashed, PR-driven, just like nonsense every day from the media to politicians. And somehow people are still reaching this conclusion. That's because people are at least getting something. And that's what I mean when I say, and that's a huge shift for the United States. It's just that the people in power do not care, right? 77% of Democrats, by the way, 77% of Democrats in the poll said this. And yet the Democratic administration does not care. That's a problem with the people at the top. That's just my response to what you just said. Sorry.
Yeah. And I'm happy you said CBS and you gave those numbers, because I think we are at this moment. I mean, many things connect right now. So we have this level of human psychology and instincts and empathy and caring for children, but I think we also have this grand feeling of almost fatherlessness or godlessness. It's as if God has died in this moment. And it's like what does it mean to have an order? It means that there is an authority, there is a figure, there is something, like an adult in the room with a big father figure or parent figure that will make things right somehow. But we don't have this anymore. And we have like all our institutions and all our beliefs are broken. They don't fit anymore. So our political systems are useless in addressing not only the genocide, but so many other issues. But also, and this is very important because we can see how US media, establishment media, covers this genocide and mediates reality to its viewers and readers. I think this is maybe the biggest crime, because if they had a more moral and principled stand, I don't think even the political class would have been able to be in such total denial as they are. But you can see how they report on this, how they cover this, how they frame this. This is the betrayal. And I think if I want to connect with what Assal said, I think you can tell. I think that many people, regardless of their political beliefs or where they sit on different issues, I think that many people have this feeling that the notion that our society has a kind of a mother figure or father figure or an order or someone like responsible, it's gone. It's irrelevant. It doesn't make sense anymore, and we are alone. In a lot of ways, we are alone. We have to create kind of a new world from scratch. And I think this is where you can connect to a lot of people, regardless of their like where they stand on a certain issue. Because I think for every adult, almost every adult in the West has this feeling by now that things are not okay, that things are not as advertised. that the government and corporations, right? I mean, so many people talk about the big corporations. This didn't exist like 20 years ago. This kind of discourse, what BlackRock is doing, and all this like dark stuff that's been going on the like the middle ground between government and business. So all the espionage, the censorship, the monitoring, all of this. I mean, it's ripe for a new conversation, but we have a media that actually blocks this conversation and won't allow it to happen, to mature and to ripen. And I think this is if we want to make change, this is where we have to step in. We have to connect this feeling of, I call it fatherlessness, but it can have different names, and to connect it to actual concrete political realities. And it will be less amazing or less incredible for other people because they have this feeling already. And this is how we can like not only stay in the philosophical or cultural level, but be in the level of reality and interpretation of what's going on. And this allows other people to be part of the conversation and the solution. Because if we are alone and we share some certain understandings, then we can do something about it. It's on us to do something else, something different.
I think there's two things that you said that were so important. One, the role of the media. I personally focused a lot on the role of the media because the media is, we in the Western world, the idea is, one of the pillars of democracy is our free media and our free press, and it's just we boast about every day, and that's why the White House throws correspondence dinners and they all get dressed up and talk about how wonderful they are. Look at us, we're such a great democracy. We have this wonderful free press, except for the fact that our free press just repeats whatever our state says, right? That's what got us into the Iraq War, based on entirely on lies, right? Now it is fact that they lied and the press just repeated it. And then we unleashed hell, right? Based entirely on fabrications and lies. And now the media does the same thing all the time. You see it, and I don't want to get into, we can talk about it more if we want, but there was another point that you made that I thought was so important. It's the idea of building the society from scratch. And again, this goes back to my earlier point, and I'm going to be optimistic on this and believe in the qualities of human nature. Gen Z, at least in the US, Gen Z is criticized by older generations for being disconnected. They're always on their devices. They don't care about anything. They're just sitting on their phones. They don't know how to socialize. This is how they're described, right? Gen Z in this country has been leading protests now from their spring semesters, now right back into it in the fall semester. And if you talk to people who are at the encampments, if you look at the encampments, if you see the kind of community that they built in those encampments, I mean, you had people protecting each other, people bringing them food, people bringing them, I mean, what they were able to do in those encampments, that's building community. That's community. That's not a generation that's disconnected. That's a generation that cares deeply about what is happening. They just have not been given voice or platform to do so. They have not been taken seriously in any way. And look at how they're being treated. They're being treated as if they're criminals because they're the ones standing up against a genocide. So they are disaffected within a society that is so corrupt that it treats their own children, right, their next generation, as criminals for caring about children that are being killed in another place. So I still believe that that is indicative of that natural, right? We need that community. I agree so much with the idea that that doesn't exist within our leadership, right? Our leadership does not, I even hate calling them leadership because that's not the meaning of leadership, right? It's just these people who are ruling over us that do not care. And that somehow becomes representative of all of us. And that's just not the truth. That's just not the case. And as soon as people have some information, the way that they see things changes, right? I edit headlines as like one of the things that I do to criticize the media. And it's so funny to me because to me it's extremely obvious. But I've had so many people tell me, I didn't think about it before. I didn't think about a word or two and how much that changes the nature and framing of a headline, how much that changes the framing of a story. And I found that astonishing because to me, it seemed extremely obvious that it's odd that they don't like to name Israel as an attacker because they don't want people to read every single day headline after headline after headline that just says Israel killed, Israel starved, Israel bombed. They don't want that because it will change that those percentages, those CBS polls, they will become much, much more extreme if that's what people are seeing every day. In spite of that, people still clearly, especially on a global scale, right? We're talking about the West. I mean, the global South is unanimous in this, and they represent a much larger population of the human world, and yet even in the West, you see a shift because these guards, these rails that they've held up for so long are starting to fail.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with both of you in the centering the media, because that is the logistical system for information. We can't expect anyone in any part of the world to know about what's going on in any other part of the world without an institution to transport that information. So I think you're getting right at the heart of it, and it gets down to the optimism versus pessimism debate. Because in order to accept or understand that the media is the kind of central lever by which you can change people's beliefs, ideas, information, get them to act differently politically, relies on a fundamentally optimistic view of human nature, that by learning something you didn't know before, ideas, minds can change. At the same time, I think to tip my hat to Kareem's pessimism, I can imagine in my own mind how easy it is to dehumanize others, even children. And an example that came to mind was I was in Berlin and I was going on this tour of the city, and the tour guide was from some other country. He was pointing out bullet holes in the wall of an apartment building. And he was saying, yeah, the Nazis were bad and everyone accepts that and agrees with that. But when the Red Army invaded, look at the bullet holes in this apartment building. They were shooting at civilians. And my first thought was, well, what about I forget what they called them in German, like the Ersatzgruppen or something. They basically gave weapons to old people and children as a last-ditch effort to defend the city from the Red Army as it was invading. So my first reaction was, well, were these civilians really civilians? Like, should we really be crying tears over these bullet holes in the apartment building? So you can, at least I can see how easy it is to dehumanize, and maybe that's justified in that case. A certain kind of, I don't know if dehumanization is the right word there, but do you see my point? Like how, you can make exceptions, or it's easy, I think, for the human mind to make exceptions when you have a deeply held belief about the righteousness of your cause, whether or not that righteousness is really in existence or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have a very good point. And Assal also said something so important, talking about how that dehumanization works. When you said, Assal, that a lot of your friends, when they see these headlines, and they're like, "Oh, I never even realized that." That is how dehumanization works. It's super invisible to most people. It's so sneaky. It's so subliminal. And it reminds me, and I have already discussed this in other shows. Some of you will probably know the story. It reminds me of the discussion I had with my mom when I was a 4 or 5-year-old or 6-year-old kid. And my mom is a typical Dutch woman, a Northern European Dutch woman. And I said, Mom, why in movies, especially Hollywood movies, why are brown people always bad? And she was like, no, that's not the case. And every time I started saying it, when we were watching a movie, like, okay, you always had white heroes and this and that, and they had maybe one brown good guy. and then most of these brown people were bad. And I remember my mom telling me years later, I kid you not, and she said, I remember you asking me that question, and now I always see it. She said, but I really did not know what you were talking about when you asked me the first time as a kid. Or not what you know, I didn't know what you thought. More like I never saw it. I never saw it. When you asked me that as a kid, I was like, probably because he's a little boy, you know, he sees things differently. And later on, she admitted it to me. Like, once I started seeing it, she always saw it, you know, she could not unsee it. And with a lot of things in our media, it works like this. I mean, whether you play video games where you have hardly any people of other ethnicities, whether you watch the series on the television, whether you watch the news, how things are discussed and portrayed. To give you an example, when you watch the news in the Netherlands, and I haven't lived in my country for almost 15 years, but this is what I remember from 15 years ago. Every time they would talk about immigration numbers, okay, they would show these statistics, immigration increases, you would always see these graphs, and then in the background, it's blurred, but you can still see it. In the background, you would see slow motion images of people with headscarves walking, women with headscarves, you know, Muslims. And then every time with a bit of a sinister kind of sound, you know, and then they would show the graphs of immigration. And I would see this. Other people wouldn't see it. And people would actually complain to me that I was just overly sensitive. Stop it, they would say. You know what I mean? And I swear, as a psychologist, what we see today happening in Palestine is majorly influenced by that years and years of racist programming that we had in our societies, from video games to watching the news to reading newspapers to seeing brown criminals in movies to not seeing positive representation of people of color, to seeing only what you also wrote about, Alon, to seeing only emotional complexity among white people in movies and stories and etc. That culminates in what we see today. I'm a strong believer of that our cultures have conditioned us into completely dehumanizing people who fall outside of the European norm. And I think that is an exceptionally destructive cultural effect of our countries, or our former and still colonial countries. What do you think, Alon?
I think that this is a great issue. I mean, I'm glad you brought up immigration, because this is like a classic. This is maybe the best example of how disconnected and completely preposterous the media conversation is, because no one in Europe, this blows my mind. No one in Europe, in all of European media companies and outlets, no one thought to tell Europeans that the immigration is strongly linked to colonial wars in Africa and the Middle East. And this is like the stupid, it's a one-piece puzzle, right? It's a red house with a red roof. And but they never say it. So no one gets it. Why do they have so many immigrants from Libya? What happened to Libya? What happened to Iraq? What happened to Syria? Why are there so many Syrians in Germany? I mean, this kind of the most basic, you don't need like the introduction to conspiracy theories to get this. This is such basic stuff, but because no one ever said it. I mean, they can't like conjure this, make this, this one piece puzzle make sense. But I do think on the pessimism, optimism front, I think that there's something we need to remember. I'm a strong believer in this, and this is not just like me preaching. I really believe this. There is something like the truth, and it's a very powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing. It's a small group of people or some individuals armed with this can overcome a much greater power, because we people, I mean, the human race, we recognize truth when we see and hear it. at the end of the day, we do. Even if we fight it, like the first time we hear it, and sometimes it takes time and it's a process, but many times we just get it. We just get it. When we see something wrong, we get it is wrong. And so I think there's it's very, and I also think now this moment in history is, as opposed to like different crises in different eras and different centuries, is global South communities and speakers and people, representatives and women, of course, are at the front of this, and it's amazing and powerful. We have grown up so much as speakers and thinkers. We are not like our grandparents, grandparents. They didn't know how to like walk through this wall of cynicism and denial and lies. They didn't get it. But for us, it's like we don't give it a second's consideration. We see the whiteout speaker lies and we get it in 1 second and we move on. But they weren't able to do this. Well, certainly not with this much ease. And when I see on Instagram or TikTok sometimes, or YouTube or Twitter, there are so many young people, and not so young people, doesn't matter, but indigenous people, native people from all over the world. Do you know how many amazing voices are coming out of Africa right now, from places you never dreamed of, from Rwanda and Kenya and Congo? People who are extremely well spoken and knowledgeable and amazing speakers for the cause. So, I mean, the colonizer's job these days is so much harder. It is so much harder, and this is why the colonial system is unsustainable, because they have to control all the discourse everywhere, all the time, in everybody's minds. It's impossible. It is impossible. Yeah. But they are refusing to come to terms with this realization that they are embarked on a like quixotic mission. It's impossible. You can't do it, especially when you're like the human minority.
Yeah.
I mean, you're dealing with China and Pakistan and Indonesia and Malaysia, billions of people who are not the naive natives and tribes from 500 years ago. This story is over. In the smallest village in Morocco or Afghanistan, you'll find someone who speaks decolonization fluently.
Well, you see the big example in Burkina Faso with Ibrahim Traore, the new leader. I mean, that guy everywhere. is so well versed in decolonial literature and all that kind of stuff. And you say something very crucial, Alon, and I will make this my last question. You say that the truth is a very powerful thing. You can have a few people who know the truth, and that can just change minds, even though you have a huge empire, for example, against you, who is just gaslighting you every day. And I mean, even after almost 12 months of a genocide, they still try to gaslight us into thinking that it's not happening. I mean, it's really insane. But we also see that the empire actually feels that truth telling is a very powerful thing, because, to be honest, we see it completely going desperate right now. The leader of Palestine Action has currently been charged with terrorism. I think the name is Richard Bernard. We have Richard Medhurst, the journalist who has been caught at the airport in Britain, also under terrorism charges. We had the FBI raiding the house of Scott Ritter, if I'm not mistaken. We had a lady called Margaret something, I think also a journalist or an activist for Palestine in Britain, also being
Sarah Wilkinson, I think her name
Wilkinson, is. What was she? Was she arrested or raided? What was it exactly?
I think it's both. Yeah, they raided her home and arrested her, and she's like a peace activist. It's totally bizarre.
So I see that the West is showing its real colors, with always a finger pointing to societies like China or Russia as being authoritarian. I mean, I find the West many times more scary, actually, to be very honest, especially right now. And it shows the two things. It shows that we are all a target if we're truth tellers, but it also shows that if we want to change the world, it's dependent on us. It's a very scary and very sobering kind of feeling. It's like we're not gonna. There are no like specific political leaders that we can rely on or whatever. It really comes to us simple people here talking about the things that are wrong in this world. And I wanted to ask as a final question, and I hope we can continue this conversation in a future episode. But I wanted to ask you, how do you see this developing, and how do you feel about it, Assal? I mean, you're somebody who and after Assal, I want to hear it from Alon. You're somebody, Assal, who is always exposing all that kind of imperial propaganda that we see in these headlines and the New York Times, and you're very active and very open in your activism and your anti-imperialism. The West is becoming increasingly oppressive, you could say, when it comes to truth tellers such as yourself. Do you feel afraid that things may actually become worse also for yourself? How do you see this developing for us as activists in the near future?
I would say that I still feel safe saying things in the sense of like my own security, but there's certainly limitations in terms of like, you have to be willing in some cases to sort of sacrifice certain career paths, right? Because that's going to be more problematic. People will look you up and say, oh, but you were not a staunch supporter of our genocide, and so that means you're not a good person and we don't want to hire you for something. And that's not a judgment on anybody who doesn't take certain actions because of, right? Everybody's life situation is whatever it is. I'm not here to judge them. If I have the ability to do something and am willing to make that kind of take that kind of a risk, that's a choice. That's a personal choice. But I wouldn't, I feel the sort of space being more tense, and I understand what you mean, right? It feels different than it did before when you would, and that could be partially the environment or my own age, right? When I was in college and I was an activist, I was much younger than I am now, and it felt very different. But I do think there's a sort of attempt to stifle certain freedoms and certain speech. And what's interesting is if you look at if you're looking just within the United States, the Democrats will say that about the Republicans, right? They'll say exactly that. Like, I mean, they're running on a platform that says, it's us or fascism. Those are your choices. Like, this is about democracy. This is about authoritarianism. Like, look, if you look at the discourse of Democrats during the Trump administration and the discourse of Trump himself, right? This idea of fake news, like anything he didn't like was fake news. And this was a huge problem, and the Democrats came out and they were like, we're not like them. We don't do that. Sort of, but you kind of do that too. I mean, if you actually watch the White House press briefings and the State Department press briefings, what you'll see is maybe not them. They don't use the same language. They won't be like, you're fake news, but you will see an attempt to sort of stifle the conversation or simply not answer the questions, right? They're not answering the questions, or when they're being really challenged, you can see that defensiveness within them. So, and that's ultimately been one of the key differences between Democrats and Republicans, especially in their current state, right? These are not the same parties. Neither of them are the same parties of 20 years ago. But if you look at them now, a lot of the differences is in language, because the way that Republican politicians will speak is just very, very blunt. And whereas, the Democrats sort of color their language in a different way. And there's this great meme that sort of shows the plane that's dropping bombs, and it's like Democrats versus Republicans, and it's the same plane and it's dropping the same bombs, but the Democrat plane has like a rainbow flag on it and like Black Lives Matter, and that's the distinction. And that meme is actually quite accurate, right? There was actually at the DNC, there were protesters outside of the DNC, and there's this one image of people coming out, right? That Democrats coming out of the convention, and people who are shouting the names of children who have been killed in Gaza, and they're plugging their ears, and one of the women has a rainbow armband on, and it's hilarious when you see that image. There's this moment of, oh my God, you're the meme, right? Like you are doing what the meme is, which is I'm not even.
And not just that, they just had an indigenous person speaking about the land or something, right? In the press, what was that?
Not a Palestinian, right? A Palestinian American was not allowed to speak at the DNC at a time in which a genocide is being committed against their people. And so it's just
no, that's not what I meant. I meant like you had like some
land acknowledgement.
Oh, right, a land acknowledgement by an indigenous person, right? And a Native American or not?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Oh,
I don't know about
okay,
that.
well, anyway, it was deeply, deeply hypocritical. Yeah, they're very much what you're saying. Sorry, Assal, go ahead.
No, it's fine. So, I mean, whatever the situation is, I don't see that we have another choice, right? Like we don't have a choice but to, once it's the whole, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you have to talk about it. You have to say it because we don't have another choice. It's our own futures and our own societies that are being threatened. And so while yes, I do feel like there's a little bit of a shift in the atmosphere, it seems like it's becoming more extreme. When I think about college protests now versus college protests when I was in college, I mean, I thought they were repressive then. Now they're calling the police on students. They're having them arrested. They're expelling them. They're suspending them. I mean, that they're beating them. They're sending police to beat them, So it's definitely a shift in the environment, but whatever it is, we still have to, as long as we have voices and platforms to speak, I think we have to do it.
Right, and what do you think? Because Alon, you're in Israel. For you, it's I can imagine it's for you these these worries may actually be more pressing. I'm surprised that it's still so how can I say that they haven't entered your home and confiscated your computer. How is that, Alon?
I think that that there's a few things I think about this issue. I think that things will get a little worse before they get better, and there's a chance some of us will be detained or arrested or something like this. I don't think Western countries are gonna resort to like firing squads, executing people behind buildings. I don't think this is where we're going, but they will try to scare us, to deter us, to sabotage our mission, our truth telling. But I think that the only way that we can fight this effectively is to go back to the fundamentals and remember why we're doing this, and remember for what we're doing this, and remember this is serious. This is not a movie. This is people's lives at stake, people's freedoms, our own freedom and dignity as human beings. This is serious and big stuff. And when you commit to this kind of thing, I know, and I knew this like on October 7th. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to shut up. And I knew that by speaking up, I'm taking some risk. It's not suicidal, but some risk. But I said, okay, this is a price I'm willing to pay. And I think that this is what you can't fight for freedom, like from the comfort of your like bourgeois existence. It doesn't happen. It doesn't work this way. You have to put something on the line. I wrote today about Muhammad Ali and the sacrifice he made. I mean, who are we to even like talk about the risk we take? I mean, in a landscape where like black leaders are being assassinated, like left and right, in the most pro-Vietnam phase of the war, he stood up and said, "I'm not going to kill people in Asia. I have no quarrel with them." And he lost his world title and so much money and the best years of his career. So we need to allow ourselves to experience the seriousness and the gravity of this moment and rise up to the challenge. And I think that when we do this, when we speak the truth as we believe in it, this may paradoxically be what the thing that calms things down. Because we are not, I think for most people who want justice for Palestine or justice for the Black community or any community that has been sidelined or mistreated, they want justice. They don't want to destroy the country or destroy society or get people hurt. This is not what leads us. I want justice and dignity for Palestinians for many reasons, but this is what I want. I want equality and dignity for everyone. And so I'm not going to shut up about it or pretend this is not exactly what I think so as to protect myself, because it's not going to work. It's going to make the system more suspicious and more paranoid. I'm going to speak plainly and clearly because I believe truth has power. And this is the time to do this. This is the chance any of us gets to speak, to say the meaningful things when they are needed in real time, not in retrospect. I mean, it's so easy to talk about the Holocaust and say, or any other crisis. Real time is so crucial, and I think we should be thankful to Palestine. I mean, Palestinians, this is something that the Palestinian struggle has done or has been doing for human consciousness. I don't think many other colonial or decolonizing struggles managed to do. I mean, Algeria sacrificed like 1 million people, but it didn't change like the big discourse about colonialism and racism. But Palestine's, through its persistence and truth telling, and like we will have our dignity. We belong here. We are full human beings, and now this spreads into other communities. This is so we can be inspired, and it's okay to be a little afraid. It's part of the deal, but this is this is our moment. This is not the CIA's or the FBI's moment. They've had their moments. This is the moment to resist in a constructive and wise way. And part of it is taking some risk, but I mean, if you're not willing to pay any price, you're not going to change anything. You can't challenge power through, like, there has to be a demand, right? And it has to be serious. So we have to do this. And we need to allow ourselves to be inspired by like great people, intellectuals and leaders who came before us.
Well said, Alon, well said. You have any final words, Peter?
No, I just thank both of you for coming on and discussing these pretty depressing issues with us, but giving, I think, me and hopefully people listening a bit of hope through the context you provided.
Yeah, exactly. I also want to thank you both for coming on, and hopefully we can do this recurring together. and we can discuss a lot of things that that are on our mind that can deconstruct the imperial narrative. I think that is a commonality that the four of us have: the need to really tear down the narrative that we see, the imperialist narrative that we always see all around us. So anyway, that was great, and for us it's now midnight, after midnight. So we're going to bed. For Alon, the evening just started, and for you, Assal, the day is just starting, right?
Today, yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks
This
a
was a
lot.
real pleasure. I was very happy to get to have this conversation, and I couldn't agree more with the idea of just the truth telling, Alan, that you keep speaking about. I agree wholeheartedly. Like, I can say it, speak from as someone who's in the US. We often, if you're an activist, you get sort of this, oh, you should, especially if you're an activist and you're not white, you're immediately told to go back to whatever country apparently you came from. And it's not, nobody wants the destruction of something. We actually just want justice. And I thought that was the perfect way of putting it.
Mm.
Great.
Thank you, guys. Love you too. It's been a pleasure and great meeting you, Assal.
Same. Thank you.
Yeah. And we're gonna invite the two of you back on in a month or so, and then we can catch up for whatever happened in the meantime, and hopefully it's a better thing than now. But again, thank you so much for coming on, guys, and let's keep following each other.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Have
you.
a good
Bye.
night.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.